The plate was already waiting for me, outside, on the hood of my own car. I could hear them laughing through the window, and in that moment something in me finally broke. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 54 years old, and this is what really happened. The air outside was sharp that evening, the kind of early spring chill that settles in your bones when the sun drops too fast. I'd driven 2 hours to get there, clutching the thought of a warm meal and warmer company, family. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I pulled into my sister Elaine's driveway just as the porch light flickered on. Inside I could see shadows moving, the clinking of cutlery, the hum of a conversation I wasn't part of. When I stepped out of the car, my stomach growled. I hadn't eaten all day. I'd skipped lunch to leave work early, just to make it here on time. I walked up to the front door, knocked once. No answer. Instead, I heard Elaine's voice, muffled but sharp. Just put it on the car. A few seconds later, the door cracked open, and her son, my nephew, slipped out, holding a paper plate covered in foil. He didn't look me in the eye, just set it down on the hood of my car like I was some delivery driver dropping off takeout. Mom says you can eat in the car. Table's full, he muttered before darting back inside. The door closed. The porch light went off. I stood there, staring at the plate. The foil crinkled in the breeze. Through the window I could see them. The long dining table lit by a chandelier, glasses raised, forks moving. My chair wasn't there. And in that moment the years of small slights, the jokes at my expense, the sudden cold shoulders, the way invitations came late, if at all of it piled up inside me. I didn't knock again. I didn't call her name. I just got back into my car, the steering wheel cold under my fingers. It wasn't always like this. When Dad died, Elaine and I had been close. I was the one who drove her to the lawyer's office, who stayed up with her when she couldn't sleep. Back then it was us against the world. But then came the will. Dad had left me the house, not out of favoritism, but because I'd been the one living there, taking care of him. Elaine had gotten the lake cabin, which was worth more. I thought it was fair. She did. From that day, things shifted. The laughs got quieter when I entered a room. My name stopped coming up in family plans, and at every holiday there was a seat for me, but it was always just a little farther from the table than everyone else's. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just family dynamics, nothing personal, but tonight proved me wrong. The drive home was silent except for the rattle of the plate on the passenger seat. I didn't even look at what was inside. Halfway back, I pulled into a gas station, threw the plate into the trash, and just sat there. My hands rested on the wheel, but my mind was somewhere else, back in that driveway, staring at the window, watching them eat without me. I realized something right there in that parking lot. I'd been waiting for them to come around, waiting for them to see me the way they used to. But some doors don't open again, and if they won't give you a seat at the table, sometimes you build your own table, or you leave them something under theirs. They'll never forget. It took me a few days to calm down enough to think clearly. I didn't want to act out of raw anger. That wasn't my style. But a quiet, methodical part of me, the part that had handled Dad's estate, who could read a contract twice without blinking, started piecing together an idea. Something small at first. Symbolic. A message, not a war. Or maybe the first step in something bigger. The next week I got an unexpected call from my cousin Lisa. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, her voice low, "but Elaine's been telling people you refused to come in. That you sat in your car like some kind of martyr. She's saying you're unstable." I let the words settle. This wasn't just about a plate on a car. She was rewriting the story, making me the villain. I could feel the shape of my plan solidifying in my mind, not out of spite, but necessity. If she wanted to paint me as the problem, I'd let her, but only long enough for her to hang herself with her own rope. That Friday I stopped by a little antique shop in town. It was the kind of place that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, where every shelf seemed to hold a story. And there, tucked in a corner, I found a polished silver serving plate, the kind you'd bring out for special occasions. Heavy, imposing, a plate that demanded attention. It cost me $75 worth every penny, because this plate wasn't just for serving food. It was going to serve as a mirror, one she wouldn't want to look into, but wouldn't be able to avoid. 2 days later, Elaine texted me an invitation. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even personal, just a group message about a small family lunch. I knew she hadn't included me out of kindness. It was likely damage control, an attempt to make it look like she'd been welcoming all along, but that was fine. It gave me the opening I needed. When Sunday came, I drove over with a silver plate wrapped in a cloth bag. She greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel, you made it." I just nodded, stepping inside. The table was set. 10 places, one of them finally for me. But I wasn't here for the food. I waited until the meal was nearly over, until coffee had been poured and laughter felt easy. Then I excused myself, saying I'd left something in my car. When I returned, I placed the silver plate in the center of the table, uncovered. The room went still. Etched into its surface, in small but unmistakable letters, was a phrase I'd had engraved the day before. "Some people set a place for you, others set you outside." I didn't say a word, just slid it forward until it touched Elaine's fingers. Her smile faltered. And that was only the beginning. Maybe I was wrong all along. What would you have done? To be continued. If you want, I can jump straight into part 2, where the first twist really hits, the moment that silver plate stops being symbolic and becomes the trigger for a much deeper revenge plan. Elaine didn't touch the silver plate right away. Her fingers hovered over the engraving as if the letters might burn her. Conversation at the table thinned into uncomfortable chuckles, the kind people make when they're trying to pretend they don't understand something. But they understood. Oh, they understood. She finally let out a laugh, brittle, practiced, and said, "Well, isn't that quaint?" She tried to pass it off like it was a quirky little gag gift, but her voice had a sharp edge, the kind she used when she wanted to cut without leaving marks. I smiled. The kind of slow, patient smile that says I'm not finished. After lunch, I didn't stick around for dessert. I said my goodbyes, shook hands, and left before anyone could corner me. The silver plate stayed on the table. I wanted her to look at it every time she walked into that dining room. 2 days later, I got my first sign that it had worked. Lisa called me again. "What did you do to her?" she asked, half amused. "She's been fuming since Sunday. Said you tried to embarrass her in front of everyone. She's even been calling Aunt May, saying you're holding a grudge from some imaginary slight." Imaginary slight. That told me 2 things. 1, she knew exactly what she'd done, but couldn't admit it without looking bad. 2, she was already on the defensive. And that is when I decided to push it further. The thing about Elaine, she has this deep, almost desperate need to control the family narrative. It's not enough for her to look good. She needs me to look bad. That's why she'd been spinning stories about me for years. But narratives are fragile. You chip at them long enough, and they crumble. So, I started chipping. I dug out old family photos. Not the glossy, posed ones. The candid shots where truth slipped through, like the one from Thanksgiving 5 years ago, where Elaine had forgotten to tell me dinner was starting an hour earlier. There's a picture of her pouring wine at the table while my chair sat empty. Or the one from Mom's birthday, where everyone's plate was full except mine, because as she'd joked back then, Daniel's watching his figure. These weren't just memories. They were receipts. I had dozens, but I didn't post them online. That would have been too obvious. Too easy to dismiss as me making a scene. Instead, I started sharing them quietly. With cousins. With family friends. Always accompanied by a neutral line like "just found this one while going through old stuff." I didn't need to explain the pattern. People could see it. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. A week later, the real twist dropped. Lisa called again, but this time her voice had an edge of disbelief. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Elaine's hosting a big dit-in for the neighborhood association this weekend. She asked Mom to loan her the fancy serving platters, but when Mom went over there, she saw your silver plate in the middle of the dining table. She was using it." I leaned back in my chair. "She kept it out?" I asked. "Oh, not just out. Mom said it was polished to a mirror. But here's the kicker. One of the guests apparently asked about the engraving, and Elaine just froze. I could picture it perfectly. Her forced laugh, the flush creeping up her neck. That plate wasn't just a reminder anymore. It was bait. That's when I decided to set the real plan in motion. The kind of plan you can't rush. The kind that starts small, seems harmless, until it isn't. The neighborhood association dinner was on Saturday. By Friday morning, I'd made a quiet phone call to an old colleague of mine, someone who still worked in event catering. I'd asked him to deliver something to Elaine's dinner on behalf of the Carter family. It was a single covered dish, on a matching silver plate. When the lid was lifted, inside was a neatly folded linen napkin. And embroidered on it in the same style as the engraving were the words, "Some people set the table, some set you outside." That wasn't the real sting. The sting was that the napkin was sitting on top of a printed photograph. Thanksgiving. My empty chair. And the timestamp in the corner. From what Lisa told me later, the moment that lid came off, the table went quiet. Someone asked about the photo. Someone else asked about the engraving. And Elaine snapped. She launched into a rambling explanation about family jokes and old misunderstandings. The more she talked, the worse it sounded. By the end of the night, people weren't looking at her the same way. If this happened to you, would you walk away or fight back? To be continued. If you want, I can make part 3 the point where this stops being a family embarrassment and turns into a full-blown strategic dismantling of Elaine's control over the family narrative, legally, socially, and personally. After the neighborhood dinner incident, Elaine stopped speaking to me directly. No texts, no calls, not even a snide comment through Lisa. That silence told me something important. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was rattled. I've learned that when people like Elaine feel cornered, they don't reflect or apologize. They scramble, they rewrite history faster. They pull new people into their circle to control the story. And sure enough, I started hearing whispers. From coworkers. From old friends. Even from my barber. They'd heard that I'd been acting erratic lately. That I'd shown up to family events with props to make people feel guilty. Props. That silver plate. The engraving, the napkin, she was reducing it to a gimmick, stripping it of the meaning it carried. And that is where she made her mistake. I realized I didn't have to prove she'd mistreated me. I just had to let her prove she'd been lying. So I did something that made a few people raise their eyebrows. I invited her to my dinner. It was casual. Just a group text about finally hosting something in the old family house. I included cousins, a couple of aunts, and even some neighbors who'd been at her infamous dinner. Elaine's reply was instant. Sure, I'll be there. Of course she would. She couldn't risk looking like she was avoiding me. Not after she'd been telling everyone we had no problems. That week, I went through my father's old study. It still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, even after all these years. Dust floated in the sunlight that cut through the blinds. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found what I was looking for, an old cassette recorder and a stack of labeled tapes. Dad had always been meticulous about documenting family finances, property decisions, and even conversations about the estate. And on one of those tapes was the recording I remembered. Elaine's voice, arguing with Dad about the will, saying, and I quote, "If Daniel gets the house, I'll make sure he's never comfortable in it." I didn't need to play it loud. I just needed the right moment. The dinner went smoothly at first. I kept things light, casual. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room. Candles flickered against the walls, and for the first time in years, every chair was full, including hers. Halfway through, I stood up and said I wanted to share something of Dad's, something I'd found while cleaning. I set the cassette recorder on the table and pressed play. The sound of Dad's voice came first, warm, patient, then Elaine's sharp, defensive. By the time her threat rolled out into the quiet dining room, I could see her grip tighten around her wine glass. Nobody spoke. Not even me. When the tape clicked off, I simply said, "Some things don't need commentary." And I sat back down. The shift was immediate. People who had been nodding politely at her stories now avoided her gaze. A cousin quietly excused himself help with dishes, something Elaine had always claimed nobody ever does for her. That night, I watched her world get just a little smaller. But I wasn't done. I knew she'd retreat to her tightest circle now, the handful of people who would defend her no matter what. And that's where her real vulnerability lay. Because Elaine had a habit of keeping her circle loyal by making promises she couldn't keep. And I knew exactly which one to expose. It started with a conversation I'd overheard months ago. At our cousin Marjorie's engagement party, Elaine had been whispering to Marjorie's fiancé about helping with a down payment for their new house. She'd promised a substantial gift, one that by now I knew she hadn't delivered. So I casually brought it up with Marjorie over coffee. I didn't accuse Elaine of anything. I just said, "I heard you guys got that down payment squared away. Must be a relief." Her reaction told me everything. "What down payment?" she asked. I didn't answer her question. I didn't need to. Because now the seed was planted, and when people like Elaine plant seeds of mistrust, all it takes is a little water for them to grow into full-blown suspicion. By the end of that week, Lisa called again, laughing in disbelief. "You've started something," she said. Marjorie confronted her. "Apparently Elaine lost it. Said you were behind some campaign to ruin her." But the more she denied things, the more people started asking why these things keep coming up. Perfect. If this happened to you, would you keep pulling threads or cut the rope all at once? To be continued. If you want, I can make part 4 the stage where Daniel stops playing subtle and turns Elaine's own need for control into a public unraveling, something she can't backtrack from without destroying herself. By now, Elaine's reputation wasn't crumbling in one dramatic landslide. It was eroding, slow, steady, and irreversible. That's the thing about quiet damage. You don't notice it until the structure starts to sag. And by the time you do, the foundation's already gone. The calls from Lisa became less about updates and more about play-by-play commentary. "Marjorie's not speaking to her now," she said one afternoon, and Aunt May canceled brunch because she didn't feel like hosting drama. Drama. Elaine hated that word, especially when it was attached to her. She'd built her whole social image on being the calm, reasonable one, and I was about to take that away from her completely. I knew her Achilles heel better than anyone. The annual charity gala. It wasn't hers. She didn't organize it. But for years she'd positioned herself as the unofficial face of it, the one connecting donors and keeping things running smoothly. In truth, she mostly hovered around the organizers, making sure her name appeared in every event photo. This year the gala was being held at the community center downtown. Open seating, press coverage, donors from all over. And one thing Elaine really didn't know, the chairwoman of the gala committee owed me a favor. 2 weeks before the event, I took her out for lunch. I didn't ask for anything outrageous. I just floated the idea that maybe, for a change, the gala could highlight the stories of families who'd supported the community in tangible ways, not just with donations but with actions. She loved the idea. I just happened to have a few examples, like the time Dad had covered the cost of the town playground repairs quietly, without a plaque, or the local scholarship fund he'd contributed to for years. And yes, I had the receipts. Literally. The chairwoman's eyes lit up. "Daniel, you should say something that night. Share those stories." I hesitated, just enough to make it seem reluctant. "If you think it's worth it." When gala night came, I made sure Elaine saw me before I saw her. She was in her usual spot, greeting people like she'd personally vetted them for entry. Her gown was immaculate, her smile rehearsed. "Oh, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, and I meant it. Dinner passed without incident. The room buzzed with polite laughter, the clinking of silverware. Then the program began, speeches from the mayor, a few donors, the usual parade of thank yous. When the chairwoman called my name, Elaine's smile flickered. I walked to the podium slowly, letting the room settle. I spoke about Dad, his quiet generosity, his belief in helping without keeping score. I told stories that made people smile, nod, even dab their eyes. And then just before I stepped down, I added one last line. Some of us know what it means to set a place for everyone at the table. Others, well, I let the pause hang. They prefer to decide who's left outside. I didn't look at her when I said it. I didn't need to. After the applause, I returned to my seat. The energy around Elaine had shifted. People still smiled at her, but some of those smiles were tighter now. She didn't approach me for the rest of the night. 2 days later, the real fallout began. A local reporter, one of the guests at the gala, called me. She'd been intrigued by my speech and wanted to hear more about the history behind it. I didn't give her the whole story. Just enough. A few anecdotes. A few hints about patterns in the family. Nothing libelous. Nothing direct. Just breadcrumbs. By the end of the week, the paper ran a feature about unsung contributors to the community, with my father's face front and center. Elaine wasn't mentioned once. Lisa told me she was livid. She says you're trying to erase her from everything she's built. Erase her? No. I was just making sure people saw the truth, without her editing it first. But I still hadn't touched the biggest card I was holding. The one thing that could strip away not just her image, but her influence. And for that I'd need to step into territory she thought she owned completely. Family property. If this happened to you, would you stop at public embarrassment or go for their crown entirely? To be continued. If you want, I can make part 5 the final, surgical strike, where Daniel uses a single strategic move to take away Elaine's control over the family, leaving her powerless without ever raising his voice. Family property. It was the one domain Elaine still controlled completely. Not legally, but socially. She was the one who decided when family gatherings happened at the lake cabin. She was the one who invited who she wanted, when she wanted, and she made sure those gatherings reinforced her version of history. If you weren't there, You didn't matter. If you were there, you were part of her story, not your own. The cabin had been in the family for decades. Technically, it belonged to Elaine outright. Dad had left it to her in the will, but what most people didn't know was that the land surrounding it, the private access road, the boat dock, even part of the yard, was still tied to the original Carter estate. And that was mine. I'd left it alone for years, never restricted access, never made a fuss. But after everything, the plate on the car, the rewritten stories, the public smears, I realized something. She'd made it clear I had no seat at her table. So why should she have a clear path to mine? I called my attorney, Jim, a man I trusted because he never sugarcoated anything. This isn't about selling it, I told him. It's about reminding someone what the boundaries really are. Jim chuckled. I've seen this play out. You just want it done clean. No drama, no loopholes. Exactly. 3 weeks later, the paperwork was filed. The access road and dock were formally partitioned and re-registered under my name, with a new easement agreement. The terms were simple. Continued use was permitted, but only by prior written request, and only for events I personally approved. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't aggressive. It was just control. I didn't announce it. I didn't have to. The next time Elaine planned a cabin gathering, she sent out invitations like always. 2 days before the event, she called me, the first call I'd had from her in months. Her voice was tight. Daniel, I just got a notice from some office saying I need your permission to use the dock. What is this? It's just a standard update to the property records, I said evenly. Keeps things organized. You can't just... I can, and I did. Silence. You're doing this to punish me, she finally said. No, I replied. I'm doing this so you remember. You don't get to decide where I belong. The gathering still happened, but without the dock. Half the planned activities fell apart. Guests noticed. Conversations shifted. And for the first time in years, Elaine wasn't the center of it all. She was just another guest. I never raised my voice. Never cursed her out. Never made a public scene. I just left her a silver plate, a few photographs, and a reminder in the land registry. And piece by piece, she lost the only thing she valued more than control, her audience. The last time I saw her, months later, was at a cousin's wedding. She walked past me without a word. No smile. No fake warmth. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dumb. Some people think revenge has to be loud to be satisfying. But the truth is, the quiet kind lasts longer. Tell me, was I too harsh, or not harsh enough?